All right. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. First, I want to check if you can hear me, if the audio is fine. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a very special panel today. The topic is gonna be about the Asia Pacific cooperation, and I hope that with a lot of guests today who are all people of color. Hope that you enjoying this stream. Hi everybody, welcome to my stream. I am Luna. I'm a Vietnamese communist born and living in Vietnam. Welcome and let's introduce our guests here. I guess. First, let's meet Tally. Hello,
Kia ora,
Tally.
everyone. Hey, you can all hear me, right? That's all
Yeah,
coming through good.
yeah.
Yeah. So, kia ora, everyone. My name's Talai Faulkner. I'm a Naitarangi designer. I made Omorangi Generation, which I just arrived the other day, and I got to show it off because I'm an egotist, right? And that's what you do when you stream, right? It won the IGF Grand Prize. So the best game of last year, essentially, in the indie space. And I think that's a really
Awesome.
positive thing because, it's a game with indigenous knowledge as its base, and it does the unthinkable in the games industry, which is critique neoliberalism and not, whitewash fascism or like kind of it doesn't bend the knee to fascism that you see often in games where there's this I guess obsession to want to say that there's both sides to it. So I think that's a really positive thing.
Congratulations. Aura asks, what is this about? Well, this is a special panel where us, the people of color, would dunk on imperialism and
Yeah.
capitalism. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Tali. Now let's welcome our Cora Silverspoon.
Aloha, everybody. Aloha. I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Aloha. I am Silver Spook. I'm a native Hawaiian activist, defender of our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, here on the Big Island of Hawaii, under ongoing illegal occupation by the largest white supremacist capitalist empire. Thankfully, failing now, along with all of its friends, but it's still continuously upon us under the in violation of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights declaration of it as a formal illegal military occupation and fraudulent annexation. Anyways,
Yes.
but on top of that, so that's I always open with my olelo and then dunk on imperialism right after. So anyway, I'm also indie game creator like my friend and relative Tali, as another descendant of the multi-thousand-year-old Austronesian language group, the Kanaka Maoli. We're relatives with the Maori of New Zealand down there. And I also make indigenous left perspective, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist cyberpunk games such as Neofeud, which is on the wall over there, and which is about growing up as a social worker, growing up in ghettos under colonialism with my language banned, with our culture banned, in poverty, surrounded by other poor people in poverty, with Mark Zuckerberg's, Larry Ellison's, and other billionaires of the world owning mansions on the hills as we live in food deserts and squatting in poison ghettos and being shot by cops more than twice as much as the difference between black and white people being shot by cops on the mainland. So your empire kills us the most of any of your terrible, illegitimate territory. Also rounds us up in schools faster than any other place in the United States, more than Chicago, more than in California. People of color being rounded up in Hawaii's illegal state schools is the highest rate. Anyways, so that's what I talk about. I talk about that. I talk about the capitalism and how it intersects with neo-feudalism, because these are all descendant Western barbaristic, pretend progressions. That's what the word progressive comes from. Marx's employer, Horace Greeley, was one of those. We're getting better from barbarism to feudalism to capitalism to, slavery was bad. Now we're capitalist Western democracies. And you never were any of those things, and neither were the Romans, really. And so I dunk on the entirety of so-called Western civilization, and I try to support. I wanted to put this panel to. I try to suggest that we put this together with all of us hooing together, which is a Hawaiian, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Maori word. That means coming together for a meeting, and also means for in Hawaii means working together collectively, cooperatively. For an Asia Pacific cooperation is what I wanted to center around Asia Pacific, our multi-thousand-year history struggle, and how we can build new Silk Roads to steer our planetary ba'a, or waka in Maori, I believe, which means boat, towards win-win cooperation rather than needless internal and then East-West conflict. And I really wanted to show how the people of the Asia and Pacific are similar, related. We literally are related and culturally related. And I really am looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Let's welcome our next comrade is Akemi. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Kia ora.
Yes.
Cool. Hi, Lucio. My name's Akemi. I was born in Peru, but I'm of Okinawan heritage, partially, not completely, but like indigenous wise, we don't consider like the quantum stuff. So I've been trying to remember that, remind myself of that. But
I love your name. I love your hair.
thank you. But yeah, I've been recently it's been like a year now since I learned more so about my heritage. I knew I was Okinawan, but like it wasn't until this past year that I kind of really understood the distinction between like Okinawa and Japan, and now I'm like really learning about like the history between Okinawa and Japan.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm here to learn from all of you and also contribute where I can.
Yes, I was also fascinated when I learned about the Okinawan like people and Okinawan culture. Very like interesting and fascinating. Thank you so much for being here. Let's welcome our comrade Karcha here.
Hi guys. Hi Nuna. Hi everybody. Thanks
Kia ora.
for inviting me. I am Carl Za. I run a podcast focused on China and the surrounding regions, history, culture, and politics. I'm just here for the dunking. That's my...
Exactly. We're all here for the dunking part.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and yeah, it's very great to finally meet you in this live stream. Okay, and our last but not least comrade is Danny. Welcome.
Thank you. It's really amazing and incredible to be here with all of you. So I'm Danny Haifong. I am a contributing editor of Black Agenda Report. I also co-edit Friends of Socialist China and was one of the founding members of No Cold War, an organization dedicated to fighting the new Cold War on China, led by the United States. And I'm of Vietnamese descent, and I live in the belly of the beast. I live in the United States, and so I see it as really my commitment and to fight this imperialist albatross. And I'm very excited to talk with all of you because one of the big blind spots here in the United States is the fact that even those who say they're against war or a new Cold War often seem to misunderstand that this new Cold War actually has current and historical consequences, especially for indigenous people in the Asia Pacific. And so I'm so glad that we're all here today to talk about the consequences and dunk on imperialism, do 360s through the legs, off the backboard, break the glass, because that is what is needed right now, because that is the huge blind spot here in the United States with regard to politics in general.
Yeah, so awesome to have you here. All right, comrade. So where do you want to start?
Yeah.
I just
You go.
say. I just want to say, like, recently, like a kind of hot topic floating around is they're talking about the American patriotism. You wanna have a take on that? Just saying, if you don't feel comfortable, you can just say no.
If I can say something, because I live in Australia, there's this, I think, very interesting thing in Australia where you have like a lot of American, like people who don't care about Australian politics but are obsessed with American patriotism. So like, that's not to say, oh, you can't look at America if you don't live there, especially like if they're doing shady stuff in country. But there's more these people who are sycophants to like American political parties that don't care about them at all, right? And the thing that's really interesting about that is basically like Australia, like Rupert Murdoch is a dual citizen between Australia and the United States. And the rules in Australia is if you're an Australian citizen, you can own 90% of the media. So he does. And if you're an American citizen, you can own 50% of American media, right? So he owns, Fox and all that, but then he owns basically every newspaper and everything like that. And so it's always this really interesting thing that in Australia, there's this really, I think, entrenched racism into the culture because, it is this like basic, like it is this funnel of American, exceptionalism into the country. And like, you can see that if you ever turn on the TV, like most of the television shows are American as well. And so you often get these, Australian leftists who try to compare themselves to America first rather than looking at their own internal problems. Because like the thing with Australia is it's got, 2 apartheid states happening right now. It's got the Northern Territory and it's also got the Manus Island Detention Centre. And both of those things, a lot of Australian leftists just turn a blind eye to because they'd rather sort of look to the States to sort of stand for those issues first. So it's a very interesting problem.
Interesting. I mean,
Sorry if I just sidetracked that straight in the start of the stream. I'm good at that.
It's totally fine. It's very interesting to see, like,
I always thought Australia as like this little America wannabe, like another white settler colony, but just in the Asia Pacific. And it wants to be, even though it's actually literally located right next to Asia, but it kind of wants to tie itself to U.S. because U.S. is the representative of like an epitome of the European white settler colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Australia has followed America into every like imperialist war, post World War II, and it's because they have this weird, it's like paternalistic, like little brother syndrome, and like you'll see that if you sort of talk to any Australian, there's and if you like I've been on Discords where there's Americans and Australians, and there's this weird thing where Australians will tend to sort of play up how Australian they are to try and like appeal to the American. It's really weird, but it's this thing that's very embedded into the culture here, and like, I think it's why like Australians can't really see that they don't really have a left and right partisan political party. I mean, they're both owned by oil companies, right? And that's the same in the US as well. But there's more support for the overt fascist ones than the ones that like to sort of cover it up. But
just on like the patriotism, because earlier and like, well, just generally, there's a lot of this discourse around patriotism, nationalism. Like, black nationalism, indigenous nationalism is the same as white nationalism. Is kind of just. I mean, I know in the global South and the global East, it's like, this has been solved for a while, but but it's the Western and the white kind of secret imperialist left that they're not really getting it. But just another way to think about it is like it's like food. It's like, all states, let's just get rid of like China, dismantle yourself. Vietnam, you don't need a party anymore. You don't need any governments. Just get rid of your Cuba. Why do you have an intelligence operation to stop Castro from being assassinated 700 times? I'm sure you'd be fine without any defenses of a variety of it's like instead of like we have to deconstruct all nations and deconstruct all governments. Like, how about like undo imperialism, undo colonialism? And if your state, like Australia, right, a settler colonial nation on the top of genocide, right,
lands,
Hawaii, right, it's a settler colonial illegitimate territory, the United States taking itself and projecting itself onto the lily pad of Hawaii so they can project into China and conduct opium wars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And today's, now it's opium warring itself by narco trafficking fentanyl into its own citizens' mouths. 90,000 deaths from that. I believe like last year. So how about deconstruct, imperialism? Deconstruct empire. Very important. Like somebody asked me, what is the nation? What is the nation? Like Hawaii. The Hawaiians just want to kick all the white people out and then slaughter them and then have the Hawaiians dancing fake versions of podunk, like Hawaiians have to dance fake versions of our culture in Waikiki, right? This fake cellophane lei, coconut shells, grass skirts for $7 an hour. We don't want to put white people in like fake barbecue, Vegas shows, and then have you guys dancing while we're sipping Mai Tais. That's not what we want. We just want equality. We just want our respect for our language. We want you to stop arresting us for speaking Hawaiian, like you did to Kaleko Ka'eo in 2018 in a court of law, which is, you can look that up. We want you to just like follow international law for the first time in your existence, please. Like, anyway.
Let's just get that out of the way. Black nationalism is good. Anti-imperialist nationalism is good. Okay, and that's it.
That's it.
If I may just say
That's
something
it.
quickly, isn't it kind of hilarious that the people who don't understand the difference between, black nationalism and white nationalism have just spent the last 3 years trying to tell you they know the difference between when racists are saying words like that they don't actually mean, and then suddenly they are finding it hard to sort of figure out what this one is. I think that's a very interesting observation about maybe the credentials of these, self-imposed pseudo-academics,
Yeah, there's a lot of projection. There's also a lot of guilty projection. Like especially a lot of even on the so-called left, the progressive side, they project a lot of white guilt about about colonialism, about imperialism, about slavery. They project it to the global South nations, which totally doesn't make sense. Especially coming from somebody who is from the global South. What are you talking about? You and your ancestors were all the ones that are doing this to us, and now you are telling me that we are the same? No, of course not.
But what if in my super 1 in a million chance imagination world, what if one of you want to commit genocide against white people? Are you against that? Are you opposed to that?
Well,
Yeah,
I also sorry.
They have to go into hypotheticals because it doesn't exist in the real world.
I also think on this question of patriotism too, right? This real desire to embrace this term often comes from those who have not acknowledged anything that everyone has been talking about up until this point. The fact that self-determination of oppressed nations and of indigenous people, of those who continue, right? A lot of these, especially in the white so-called communist movement, white socialist movement, no longer acknowledge that colonialism exists in any way, shape, or form, domestically or abroad, especially here in the United States. And the same is true in the Western world. And from that assumption comes this capacity to then embrace patriotism, because then, and this is an old CPUSA line. We have to be very clear here. This has nearly 100 years of history of the Communist Party in the United States taking a very reactionary position when it comes to the US's very origins, right? The US's origins in settler colonialism, the genocide of indigenous people, and the enslavement of Africans. That is where all of this comes from. And so this new embrace among online Marxists of patriotism comes from those who have not studied that history and also have not yet ever talked about the significance of racism, despite the fact that any class struggle here in the United States, any anti-imperialist struggle that is going to reside here in the United States cannot but address that if they are going to be successful. And all that the embrace of patriotism really does is to stoke and to antagonize those forces which are actually at the heart of any kind of revolutionary struggle that's really ever existed in the United States and the Western world. And I think that is really what should be discussed when we talk about patriotism, because there's just too much of this whatever is in our heads, right? And this is not Marxism. Marxism is not whatever goes through our heads, however we want to define terms, is what matters. What matters is the objective reality of the situation. And the objective reality of the situation here in the United States and the West, especially coming from my experience in any left space, there's always this question of how do you address race? How do you address racism? Oftentimes it's just racism is just happening and you have to struggle against it because your organization becomes ineffective and completely paralyzed by this reality. And right now, in the United States, in the whole entire Western world, there is a decline of an empire that is necessitating an even stronger compulsion to hold on. I call it pearl clutching, to clutch onto these pearls, some of which are ideological, like white supremacy, in order to maintain this hegemonic empire that's terrorizing people in the Asia Pacific, indigenous people in the Asia Pacific, and really people all around the world on all continents, including the one of North America right here. So I think that is just not being reckoned with in regards to those who embrace patriotism and say, yeah, we can appeal to those who have right-wing ideas and we can win people over to socialism by appealing to their patriotism. It doesn't have any basis in reality, and it doesn't have any successful examples of when that has worked. The only successful examples of socialism really building a strong movement in the heartland of imperialism is when those movements were tied to struggles against racism and colonialism. And that I write for Black Agenda Report, and we always talk about how the Black movement is really the movement that has been at the forefront of the socialist struggle here in the United States. And still we see the white left being so confused, and they hold on to the Democrats, they hold on to Bernie Sanders, they hope to reform this thing away. And part of that is because they don't want to touch the race question, they don't want to touch the imperialism question, because that then creates a feeling of insecurity about the very existence of this empire that they sent, and they can't just tinker it away. So anyway, I'll stop rambling on.
I just want to say, I have no problem with American patriotism if that means to address all the injustice, inequality that exists in the current system. Like Silver Spook said, what people want is equality, right? If we are to build a new U.S. or whatever country on the North American continent that's based on equality, based on justice for all, right? Not just for the mainstream or the white majority, but for all people. I can stand for that. That's what people want.
I will stand for that.
Yeah, that's what people want. People want equality and justice, and if we can focus on building that society, and once we get there, yes, you can be rightly proud of addressing the past ills, the past and the present inequality, racism, imperialism. If you've done that, yes, you by all means you deserve to be proud of that.
I just want to quickly go on a thread, then I want to throw it into kind of the history of the cooperation, because I've been trying to study, and I just want to say I'm a big fan of both Danny and Carl. So I'm having a trouble keeping my fangirl enthusiasm at bay right now. I listened to the Silk and Steel, the Zhang Yu Taiwan podcast. I'm incredibly educated. I realized there's more literature in Asia in the Pinky than in the entire the Western world combined. You add all the Shakespeare and the Dostoevsky, it's nothing. Anyways, but I just want to just tying Hawaii and China together. Like I bring up often, like the word hui, right? And hui, right? It's a very similar word in Hawaiian Chinese. I'm from the Chinatown of Honolulu. My family is Asian and Pacific Islander here in Hawaii. I did Chinese lion dance. Like I did like Gungi Fa Choi. It was like that was just, we were all kind of surviving together in the ghetto after the denationalization of the sovereign country of Hawaii. And just to kind of like give a little bit of the background on that, of how to move towards like how we can cooperate more. We can keep dunking, but I want to kind of put out a little small olive branch, at least into the East and the West. But many Americans, I put a thread in this chat. Many Americans think that Hawaiians lived in huts prior to colonization. However, the U.S. actually deindustrialized us before 1898. Hawaii already had electricity, mass transit, railroads. Iolani Palace, our capital, had electric lights before the White House. There's clippings that a historian, Hawaiian Filipino historian, Adam Kiave, has brought to attention. And you can look at that in the thread I posted earlier. We have trolleys, we have railroads, no United States backing. They like to say, Americans say, you should be thankful that America gave you electricity and cell phones and trucks. Like, we already had electricity. The president of the United States was superstitious about having his soul sucked out through his toilet. He believed that there was some kind of spiritual evil in indoor plumbing, and so we already had that in Hawaii. But so anyway, so we also had the highest literacy rate in the world, U.S. and Europe, before colonization in 1869 symposium. Kamehameha, our elected leader at the time, brought books of law, newspaper, agricultural products, Bibles, textbooks, and other examples of quote unquote civilized accomplishments. In the 1860s, Europeans said this island nation of Hawaii is ahead in literacy of France, Britain, Spain, every one of the so-called great empires, and the enlightened countries of Europe are behind it. So this is like throws Hawaii, I think, is a very key like Rosetta Stone to unlocking a lot of the lies of colonialism and the racism that is part of war and colonialism, which is that we spoke Hawaiian English and we had diplomacy across the world. We had Kalakaua one of our leaders invented a subaquatic vehicle when Jules Verne was merely dreaming up 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We were like a living actual Wakanda in that sense, indigenous future, more technologically, economically, and socially, politically advanced than any Western nation in the world. Sovereign country of Hawaii. How do we deal with racism? How do we deal with racism? Hawaii had black citizens before the U.S. Civil War, and the slaves that stepped onto Hawaiian soil were free. Chinese were full citizens in Hawaii as the U.S. chained them up to build railroads on the U.S. West Coast and the Canadian West Coast. The Underground Railroad did not end in Canada. Black people were segregated in Canada in this time. They were full citizens. And there's an actual certificate in that thread showing a former African slave in the United States that was a full citizen. His name was Moses Allen. In the time in which the United States and both countries are committing horrible genocide also against their indigenous peoples there, and this Canada still is, if you look at the UN investigation. Anyways, so and then to the end, so we were very advanced we had basically socialism. We had universal healthcare 25 years before any European country. Otto von Bismarck introduced it to Germany, but it was in the 1860s at Queen's Medical Center in response to COVID-19, to a pandemic, to smallpox, etc. And we also had vaccine mandates, no protests against the vaccinations, by the way, to control. And also, it's very interesting, the Chinese were routinely blamed. Asians were blamed for the plague. Queen Liliuokalani, I didn't have it in the thread, but she actually investigated independently and found out that white crew members of ships would lie about the plague that they were bringing in, the Black Plague, blame it on the Chinese. But the Hawaiian Queen investigated and said, the Chinese have only a couple with mild symptoms, and there were dead white crew members. The ship was the Quinta. And so anyway, this history of anti-Asian racism and on top and imperialism in the United States, because it was a socialist country, because it was a non-white country, because it showed up as Vietnam and China are currently doing to the United States with better across the board economic, social, political, COVID-19, environmental, across the board poverty alleviation outcomes. When I look at our Asian relatives over there, what I see is the 21st century version of what Hawaii achieved on a smaller scale in that time, which is when you actually do socialism and you actually let people mutually cooperate without mass organized violence, without oppressive structures. People advance very quickly, and then they provide for all across the board. And so, and then the United States did a coup, denationalized us, pointed at gunboats at our country, illegally overthrew us for white capitalists, Dole Pineapple, United Fruit Company in Central South America, Bob and Sanford Dole, illegally annexed Hawaii fraudulently under the UN, and then turned us into a giant fruit company, and then sold us as Hong Kong. Hong Kong and Hawaii, very similar history. It was McKinley said, we need Hawaii to get our cut of the Chinese silk and the tea and traffic opium into their mouth. And the British have a nice Hong Kong paradise resort to do this from, while the Chinese carry the white people on their backs. And that's what we were Hawaiian was just America's Hong Kong. Anyway, so I'm trying to interlink some of the struggles, which many definitely in the West, few people even bother to listen to Asians, which is why I try to bring that up, and Pacific Islanders. They just lump us all together and have a day and put Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton on it and say that we've solved racism against Asian and Pacific Islanders. So anyway, I want to throw that open to everybody, because I really think that there's something very important to how we can cooperate, not just for ourselves, but for the entire world, and to stop militarization and war, etc.
I like to respond, if I may, to Silver Spook, because what you brought up is not just happening in Hawaii, but happening on a global scale. If we look at, we in high school, I went to high school in US. We've been taught, there's a civilizing mission, how the West is trying to bring their value to the rest of the world.
Damn it.
But the latest, history, the latest historical research have actually showed us that when the Europeans first showed up on the scene, when they came into the Asia Pacific, the main advantage that allowed the Europe to eventually gain dominance and dominate much of the globe. It wasn't because their advanced political system. It wasn't because it wasn't even necessarily because of the technology. It was because military power, because the much of the world was already interconnected before the European colonialism arrived. In the Indian Ocean basin, in East Asia, there's already a thriving trade networks that connecting all the people together. When the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope, what they did, they come into an existing network of Arab, Indian, Chinese, Malaysian, Vietnamese, Okinawan networks of these trade works, and Portuguese decided to take that over by force. They built a series of forts, and then they decide to take that all that trade, monopolize all that trade for their own benefits. And of course, then later, Europeans introducing opium, but literally pushing drugs onto the Asian people. This is like the history that's not been taught, in our schools. Instead, we have been taught that the Europeans are bringing the lights of civilization to these benighted people all across the world. But it's quite opposite if you actually read actual history. That's enough my rant.
Yeah, and
I think it's just
sorry, no,
I
you
just
go,
wanted
Luna.
just wanted to add a little bit about history of Vietnam. Well, the thing is, the point of colonization and imperialism is that like they came here, they destroyed every freaking thing, and then they gave us a little bit of civilization, and then they call themselves the civilizer. Like Vietnam, we were robbed everything by the French. We were enslaved by the French. Then we were bombed to the Stone Age by the USA. And then after they lost the war, they gave us, the USA, like the IMF and the World Bank, gave us a little bit of money to rebuild our country, like nothing compared to what we got destroyed by them. And then those in the West are like, whoa, thanks to capitalism, thanks to the USA, Vietnam can be like to this day. Like, holy fuck, are you aware of history at all? Like, without the destruction from the USA, Vietnam should have been in a way better place right now. But
something me and Yardon were talking about the other day, she had a really good joke, which was, they'll always say that idea that we brought you civilization, and then in the next sentence they'll say, I'm not responsible for what happened in the past. It's that that total hypocrisy around it. I was
there's also the idea that how somehow all that injustice got dealt with back in 50s. We have dealt with our own past. Our horrible past back in 50s, 60s. Now we're past that. We're post-racial. we're post-colonial, right? We're not. We're modern now. We already got beyond all that bad stuff. We're progressive. You guys need to deal with your own problems. That's a very common tactic, but it falls flat in the face of reality, as we all of us know. And I want to go back to the little bit what both Luna and Silver Spook have said, is that currently what we are witnessing today in 2020, in the 21st century, is actually a re-emergence of the old trade network and the old with all the previously colonized people throwing off the colonial yoke. Now they're slowly starting to rebuild, and their society are prospering after they gain their own sovereignty. And this is when you witness a power shift. The economic center now is slowly shifting back from Atlantic Basin, from between Europe and United States, and now shifting to East Asia, to Asia Pacific. And that's what freaks all these U.S. American supremacists out, because they feel for the first time the U.S. is slipping from its world power, global hegemon status. And that's why we see all these reactionary rhetorics in the media today, because they see emergence, the final emergence of Asia Pacific, they see they see that the U.S. can no longer pushing people around, and they're not used to that. That freaked them out. Their world is crumbling right now.
And
Exactly.
to piggyback off of that, with Asia rising, the fear of Africa, South America, the Caribbean, right? The Asia, the example of China, Vietnam, of all development shifting to the east really creates this potential that the rest of the global south will come along with them, because one of the things that this racist American exceptionalist ideology that Carl spoke about and Silver Spook spoke about, in terms of really teaching us how incredible so-called U.S. and Western civilization is, one of the things that it relies upon is the demonization and the dehumanization of the victims of that ideology and the victims of the imperialist system. So, as someone who grew up as an Asian American in the United States, this is very important because, Luna, you spoke about the history of Vietnam. One part of that history that translates into the experience of Asian Americans and Vietnamese in particular in the United States is this idea that the United States is their benefactor, like they have benefited from the U.S.'s humanitarianism, their charity, when in fact what happened was the United States invaded, stole, and even and cajoled and rounded up their allies in Vietnam during the brutal colonial and imperialist war there, and brought them here and didn't treat any of their needs. There's still a lot of Vietnamese here in the United States who have not had any assistance for the Agent Orange effects that they've experienced and whatnot. But this ideology, this idea that the United States has provided something, and the virulent anti-communism and the racism that goes along with this American benevolence narrative, really creates a problem for Asians in America, for those who come here really thinking that they are going to benefit. And a lot of them do in some ways. And there's a big problem here when it comes to cooperation from here inside the belly of the beast, is that we have to fight this imperialist ideology, this racist ideology of American exceptionalism, and demonstrate that the rise of Asia, led by socialist countries, really, and led by this real reinvigorated fight for self-determination across the continent, that this is really the future of humanity, and the U.S. and its Western empire is really history at this point, and really the world is waiting for it to be swept into a dustbin, right? And I think that is something that I just want to emphasize, because this whole model minority myth, this whole idea that Asians in America are privileged, we're seeing how this anti-China, this new Cold War that imperialism is waging, is exposing the contradictions of that. That when you have a society steeped in racism, in a system steeped in racism, in this mythical civilization, white man's burden ideology, that no one is safe if you do not fit within the parameters of what that system ultimately wants and whether you are useful to it. And I hope that can push more Asians in America and the Western world to begin to connect more with the East and connect more with their homeland, more so than trying to hold on to whatever they believed was exceptional and and benevolent about this decrepit social order.
Yeah. Well, we do have a question from one of our comrades in the chat. Thank you so much, Avis Spartan. The question is, this is for our panel, okay? Could decomposition of the U.S. empire and total immiseration of rural whites to the conditions of that of other POC make a multiracial U.S. proletarian nationalism a possibility for the first time? What do you guys think about this?
I think Akemi should speak first because she hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been a little quiet because I'm like completely out of my league. My learning has just started in the past couple of months, so I'm like intaking. I've been listening to like podcasts of y'all's and trying to intake the knowledge. But going back to if we want to answer this question first, I'm not sure how to answer it right away.
Yeah.
If anyone else
exactly.
has
This is-
something.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll say that it does. Part of it is deconstructing whiteness itself, which is it's a very complex issue, difficult to talk to about with people in places like the United States. Anyone else want to take that?
Okay,
I can say
this is-
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, go
Well,
ahead.
okay, so I'm not attacking the question or anything, but I would say that the assertion in it is wrong, because the idea that multiracial U.S. proletarian nationalism possibility for the first time, that's kind of undermining the fact Native Americans been there forever, and they are different races. Like the idea of Native American as a combiner or joiner or this homogenous group is a fantasy, a colonial fantasy. So I think if white people dissolved out of the US, would you have this thing for the first time? Well, I think that kind of, you got to also think about the history of the US in that, plenty of tribes existed there beforehand. And so, to say that is some, like, I'm not implying this from what the person's saying, but I think there's this, you often hear, I think, this idea that, this sort of thinking is, pie in the sky, it's never happened before, it's all utopian. And the reality is, from the history before white people, is that it's not. And I think that's sort of something that's how I sort of interpret that question. Anyway, you go, Carl.
Okay, I think the decomposition of U.S. empire must be the first, right? That without the destruction of U.S. empire, there will never be, like, our elite will never let us focus on the reconstruction of the country. So the first thing that must happen is a total destruction of U.S. empire, which has brought untold miseries to the global, to much of the world outside the U.S., especially in the global South. So that must happen first, and after the destruction of the U.S. empire, then we can focus our energy for the people that who resides in the present United States, then can focus on their energy on reconstructing the country and build the country from ground up based on equality and justice. And right now, even the rural whites, they're also the victim of the U.S. imperialism and the elite that control the U.S. government, because right now all the resource goes to arms manufacturers. The U.S. spent $2 trillion on the war in Afghanistan for 20 years, and most of that money, most of that $2 trillion went in the pockets of the U.S. defense contractors, and that was the way it was designed. It was taking the money of everybody's money and putting in the pockets of a few, right? And this benefits. There's only benefits of very, very few people. Most of the people in the United States are a victim of the system, and they may just not realize that. Instead, the elite plays divide and conquer, right? They whip up all these cultural wars to pit different people against each other. What we need to sit down then is like, okay, what is our interest? What is our economic interest? Let's work together. Let's start from the common ground. And I think everybody can agree, right? Equality is good, yes, and
Yes.
and then we can go from there. We can just the easiest way is to strip funds from all these weapon manufacturers, all these arms merchants, right? and then we can build infrastructure, for example, right? Right now, the U.S. infrastructure is crumbling. Our schools are crumbling. These are the things that can serve the broadest overall public, right? Those are the rally points that I think most of us can rally together and support, and then based on that we can build forward a different future. But first thing that must happen is the destruction of U.S. empire, which benefits very, very few people.
Yeah, exactly. Just to throw it to Akemi, I did kind of organize the panel, and Akemi, this is only Akemi's like second time actually streaming. So it's but you know, I do want to hear, because want to hear from Akemi, because Okinawa, or the Uchinanshu, I was like listening to the Taiwan theme, the Silk and Steel podcast, and I was listening about the Luchu and all this history, and Akemi was teaching me things. I mean, to be totally honest, like Akemi's being very humble right now, but that's a normal thing in our cultures. But Akemi is Okinawan, which is one of the most militarized. Speaking of U.S. military arms manufacturers, like the yacht payments for Lockheed Martin executives come right out of stuff that is happening in Okinawa. Also, of course, Guam, and of course, Hawaii. We are the head of Indo-Pacific Command. And so, like, which is why I wanted to have this panel, because the peaceful Pacific means peace, you know, we're the pico of the world. And we don't want to center ourselves in the entire global struggle, but like, we happen to be the place between the two largest West and East superpowers. I would argue like the World War I, World War II, these are all fictions of the West. This has been an ongoing war, colonizer versus colonized, for hundreds at least of years. And this war has never ended. Like, there's a song, Shima Uta, which I learned from Akemi, which is a very important song about the struggle of the Okinawan people. And I'm going to throw it to you in a second, Akemi, but and the quarter of their entire population that were annihilated in the Battle of Okinawa, the continuum American occupation. People worry about the PFAS, forever chemicals. The military just dumped mountains of that stuff into their drinking water. And I lived in the Chinatown of Honolulu, Hawaii, Kalihi Palama area, the ghettos. I was surrounded by Okinawan and Vietnamese and Chinese, and my family is Hawaiian, Chinese, Filipino, part white. I have but I didn't even know anything, because like Carl said, in the West, there is no education system. There is only conditioning, you know, and so I didn't know anything. And Akemi, I'm sorry, I'm speaking everything for you, but Akemi, maybe just talk a little bit about just a little bit of the history of Okinawa, which is so important for deconstructing empire in the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. I learned this partially from Rob Kajiwara, and also I think the podcast you did, Carl, with Rob Kajiwara. But I heard in one of Rob Kajiwara's recent videos, where he was interviewing some other Luchuans and then other people in the Pacific, and something that stuck out to me that I was like, is that true? It was that people have been on the Okinawan archipelago since, like, fossil records show, like 32,000 years, which is like a long time, longer than I thought like human civilization even like existed. And now I'm like trying to learn Uchinaguchi, which is one of the Okinawan languages, just like coming to the realization that like this language is thousands of years old, and it similar to what happened in Hawaii. It was banned after Japan annexed Ryukyu in 1879. They also passed. I have like some notes here that I took. There was a passage of the ordinance to regulate dialects in 1907, and there was just a bunch of enforcements of that just to try and ban the language, and people, children were beat. They were made to wear things that said that they were speakers of a dialect, and the only way to get that off of themselves was to tell on someone else. So it's like that culture was also being broken, of like that the similar to Hui, there's also a word in Uchinaguchi, Yuimaru, which means the spirit of cooperation. So like breaking down that language and the culture. And now there's like a gap in like older folks will speak some Uchinaguchi, but not a lot of like English or Japanese, and then younger folks like don't speak Uchinaguchi at all. And there's like that gap in the middle where parents were like purposely would like not speak it and would like tell their children not to speak it, and were like ashamed of their language because it was beaten out of them. And it's just really hard to talk about sometimes, and it's hard to even learn about. Yeah, like I'll do some studying and stuff and read up, and then I'm like in tears, like reliving the history of like our people over generations and stuff. And then there was the Battle of Okinawa, where as Silver Spook said, like a fourth to a third of Okinawan civilians, not even counting like folks that are working in war positions, coerced into that. But there was also there were caves that were dug out using Okinawan slave labor. And then when American soldiers would come, and the Okinawan soldier, or not the Okinawan soldiers, the Japanese soldiers who were hiding with the Okinawans would push the Okinawans out to the front to take the brunt of bombings. And I just think about like how whole lineages must have perished. But before that, before the war and then shortly after the war, there was a lot of emigration. So there's a vast Uchinanchu diaspora around the world. A lot of whom probably don't even know they're Uchinanchu because they've been told they're Japanese their whole life. And the way I found out is because I threw my last name, because when Japan was taking over, they were also trying to get everyone to speak standard Japanese and then also standardize their names. So there are several last names that are pronounced differently in different places, or depending on like if your family emigrated before or after all the standardization was happening, and then if there's like different stages of it too. There was a whole video called "What's Up with Okinawan Names" that like really taught me about this. But to go way back, back in the early days, the kingdom was called Luchu, and so that's like the name that I try to use. And we were given that name by, I believe, the Chinese who found us, and Luchu meant something like easygoing people, and we're like, yeah, that's cool with us. We didn't really have a name for ourselves. And then China taught us a lot about like different things that we could do, and like we built castles and had a kingdom and stuff. And then we were like the center of trade there was like two golden eras of trade, and just like the center of a lot of trade going on in all of that area. And before Japan annexed Luchu, they took over. There was a Satsuma, I believe.
Yeah.
Had the Satsuma took over, and they were like, they took over, but they let us do our own thing anyway, so that they could get goods and stuff from China, because they weren't allowed to trade with China because they didn't want to be a tributary state or didn't want to pay homage or whatever. And yeah, that's a little bit. I lost my train of thought now, but
I can really relate to that.
Yeah.
In like, that violence of that colonization around, the language and stuff, like, with our language, like Te Reo Maori is sort of a generalized revitalization project, and it doesn't really take into account the dialects that go up and down the coast. And I think it's one of those things where when you know what's lost and you've seen what has been taken and destroyed by this empire, it is a really hard thing to look at, and you're really brave for going and looking at your own family history at that, because I know for me it's the same deal. You go and you look and you see where that violence occurred, and the really sad thing is when you go and look at why that violence occurred, it's disgusting. Just the greed from those nation states to steal, invade, and take. And I think it's one of these things. Before we started the stream, I was having a yarn with Luna about this, but it's this idea that this colonization always follows the same rule set. It always first thing it tries to do is take the language. It's speak English, and when it forces people to speak English, it's doing that because English has a lot of assumptions built into it. This idea of like white supremacy, when they say the word civilization, that automatically implies the existence of a savage or a primitive or a barbarian that you have to go and kill. Okay. And that's just one example of one word. But when you start to look at how those words are constructed in the English language, there's a reason they tried to teach that over, our ways of doing, because our ways of doing, some of them didn't have things like that. And for example, with Maori, there was a thing that happened where when the British came here, they thought they saw themselves, because they said, oh, look, it's people who do war as well. But there's differences, and there's different ways of how we actually did things. Our concept of mana is very different to their ideas of exploitation and taking and stealing and killing. Okay, and it's this thing where, sorry, I'm I'm sort of going through what you're thinking there, but it's this thing where when you learn about what's lost and that history and that culture that can't be taken and just recreated, it does really take it out of you. Like not to self plug or anything here, but Umurangi Generation just got a patch where it has a Te Reo Maori translation in it. And it was done by young Maori people who are learning their language, but also in a contemporary space where, they're, an organization mainly of people who game. And, to see that revitalization, that's an intangible wealth that doesn't really translate to money, dollars, or sales. It's a value that goes beyond that. And, it's that kind of thing where I just wanted to say once again, like what you're doing there is a really important thing. And, keep it up, and if you you're always going to find solidarity with that, because that is a really common thing that happens in these nation states with their nation building process. That's what they call this form of colonization now. They call it nation building, right? And I'm going to rant for hours if you get me started on that, but basically it's the same rules from before. They haven't changed them. These guys don't. These guys do iterative design where they don't change if they think it works, and so that means they continue to do this. But that means for us, it means we can share ways to help connect back up and revitalize all of that.
Yeah, those people, like, they came to our land, they destroyed everything. They even took away our own history and then they whitewash it. And that is why it's so important for people like us to study our own history, to actually study our real history. You will know, like, just read the real history of our own people. You will, like, I am lucky to be born in Vietnam after we won the Vietnam War. So, like, we spent years in school to just study about the Vietnam War. Like, how much we spend our times and effort to study about what imperialism and capitalism been doing to our country, to our own people. And this perfectly ties with this super chat. I think people within America empire should shake very foundations of what makes the states, the United States in the first place. Yeah, like, study about history of the oppressed and history of the oppressors. That is the very first step if you want to decolonize and deprogram yourself.
Yeah, and I would like to piggyback off that because, Luna, I've really appreciated that you have this channel at all, because it really does reach Western audiences. And for somebody who, was raised in the United States as Vietnamese Chinese, I didn't get the opportunity. I had that history stolen from me because there's all of these pressures in the United States. There's all sorts of things that happens to the diaspora here in the United States, which compels, especially in my family, to keep that history away from me. So I felt like growing up, that was sort of the foundation for me to eventually get onto this path of wanting to take down this empire, because that's what this empire does, is it strips away the history of the oppressed so that it can continue to accumulate and continue to expand its hegemony. And I think the question that was asked earlier about proletarian nationalism, I don't know if that is really the right approach to everything that we're talking about, because the United States is constructed in a very specific way, and everyone who's spoken has kind of alluded to this. But when it comes to the objective situation here in the US, one of the things that has to be emphasized is that the United States' ruling class, because white supremacy has been such a boon for its capitalist empire, there's always going to be a bottom. There's always going to be the targets of racist oppression and imperialist oppression. That will not just go away without this society being completely uprooted, without some kind of social transformation and revolution. And so even so, now to this day, we have a situation where white America, 40%, there was a report done by the Institute for Policy Studies said that 40% of white Americans are asset poor. That report was about how Black Americans are actually on the road to zero wealth, right? With the median Black family owning about $1,700 worth of assets, but nothing, right? So there's always going to be a bottom that white workers and the so-called white proletariat can sort of look at. And Carl mentioned empire. That's why we need to take down empire, because that is one of the functions of empire, is to cement this class structure here at home. Without the empire and its civilizational racist project abroad, it would be really difficult to convince Americans and Westerners of all classes outside of the ruling class to really support what is going on. But because there's always a bottom to look to, right? There's always a so-called underclass, a class even below the proletariat in some ways, that allows for this empire to continue to reproduce itself. And so I don't really ever think there's going to be a proletarian nationalism in the United States. I don't think that can ever really work. I think what we have to work towards is to build a broad class struggle that puts at the forefront the self-determination of oppressed nations, and a real internal struggle around this question of race, which acknowledges this long history of both empowering struggle and revolutionary struggle among the oppressed, the indigenous, Black people, etc. And also the fact that we are going to have to address all of the shortcomings and contradictions within our own movement if we are to really move forward. And I think that this hope that the plight of rural white workers or poor whites will somehow just get rid of that contradiction, right? These contradictions, I think, can create a lot of short-sightedness. And I think a lot of that short-sightedness comes with this hope that, embracing patriotism as it is now, not as, like, let's say Carl defined it, I think poses a lot of problems. So I think that there needs to be a twofold struggle, both internally and externally, when it comes to empire and racism, in order for anything to happen here in the United States, to recover that history, to then dismantle what it really means, as the last super chatter said, what it really means to be the United States. That in and of itself will be a historical question, which, Marxism and socialism and all of the revolutionary ideologies will have to come together and figure out how do we do that here? How do we move forward in this struggle right here? Because it is a complicated and unique situation, not exceptional, not some kind of, it's exceptional in a myriad of ways that are not beneficial to us. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, the empire and racism is intertwined, and
Exactly.
there was a recent decision by Mexico to legalize abortion, and there was a viral tweet by a quote unquote progressive American woman who said, "What? How did Mexico got ahead of us?" I mean, the assumption is that United States should naturally be on top, right?
Yeah.
United States should be naturally
forever the number one.
Exactly. The American exceptionalism in that tweet is like off the chart. I mean, it's just why wouldn't Mexico have it better than United States? It's not the natural order of things that U.S. must be on top, right? And this is because U.S. is like the most propagandized nation, and we just absorb all these propaganda by osmosis. I remember when I very first came to U.S. as a 13-year-old. I started in 8th grade. This was 1990, so the first Gulf War just got it underway, and in our classrooms, I'm an 8th grader. In our elementary school, posters of supporting our troops everywhere, like image of tanks and guns and airplanes. And I just came from China. I just left the airport and came to this, like, what is this bizarro world? Why are they showing all these like militarized images to 8th graders, to like elementary school? But people who grow up in that, they're not aware of it, because like that's the environment they're in. They don't question it. But for outsiders coming in, they're like, this is crazy. This is off the chart. But the empire must be demolished, and their propaganda must be exposed. And back from what Akemi has said, what a lot of the Americans don't even realize. We are unwelcome. The U.S. military presence is very much unwelcome in Asia or anywhere for that matter. And I sometimes cite the example of Okinawa and like, look, Okinawans overwhelmingly do not want U.S. military there, and some of these people on social media would respond to, oh, but Japan wanted us there. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Okinawa, there's a difference between Okinawa and Japan. The reason Japan want to stick the U.S. military base in Okinawa is because they do not want U.S. military base on their home island, on the Japanese main island. They treat the Okinawans as a second-class citizens. So that's why they shove all these American military presence in Okinawa. And the fact that the Japan want the U.S. military there doesn't actually just means Okinawa is being doubly colonized by both Japan and United States.
Yeah.
but people don't get that because that's never part of their education. They don't even realize that. They don't even realize, see, there might be a difference between Okinawa and Japan. They don't know that the history of East Asia, and all they know is, Japan wanted us there to protect from China. It's like, look, you are not making the Okinawans safer by stationing U.S. military target on Okinawa, right? Like now you're actually making Okinawa a target by putting all this military asset there. You're actually making people on Okinawa more unsafe than before the U.S. military got there. And by the way, and also people of Okinawa don't want you there, so please get the fuck out.
Exactly. So like it is a fact that like about now the USA has about 800 military bases all over the world, and there are about 200 countries in the world. So it means that like in every single country on earth there's gonna be 4 military bases over there. And about last month the USA actually asked Vietnam to put a military base in the sea in the south of Vietnam. And like the BBC and Reuters and Radio Free Asia, they went nuts because of this. And they the way they reported, like, oh, the USA like offer this, and Vietnam would like love to accept this, to put a military base of the USA in Vietnam. And then after this, like a few days or something, the official speaker of Vietnam got an official answer. It's like, no. Vietnam will never allow any country to put any military base in Vietnam. And BBC never report this. The Reuters never report this. Just shut the fuck up. And then like, this is like, I don't know, like so crazy. The USA, except the US exceptionalism, they act like the whole world loves them. They act like the whole world welcome them. But like, holy fuck, no. It's...
Like, like
I'm sort of I'll just say something quick and then you should go.
Yeah.
Because I
Say it.
assume there are a lot of like, I guess, Westerners in the chat and that. I would really encourage
something. Just like, so long story short, like Vietnam's stance is very clear.
Yeah.
That like we are not gonna fucking like join the US.
Yeah.
On this like anti-China shit, like no thanks. And the thing is that like you're so like the USA is so pathetic that like the only way that like, because they cannot convince the whole world, so they propagandize. They are propagandizing their own like people in believing that Vietnam is now a close ally to the US, quote unquote. It's like, it's so funny. It's so funny to see a bunch of like reactionary in the USA they asked me directly on Twitter. Like, Luna, how do you think about like, like the Vietnam right now is a close ally with the USA? So much for like hate capitalism. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, it's not. Nope.
This is my challenge for every white person. Like, if you are born and lived or educated in the West, English, French, Spanish, 75% of the French think that the US won World War II. There's no education system in Europe. If you're white, try never opening your mouth or especially never DM or at any global South or colonized person in the rest of your life, okay? Because you don't have anything. News, university system, you're still citing Adrian Zenz, who is from an accredited, college in Germany. The left, right, and center media. There is no, this idea that there is some kind of critical thought, free thought. I mean, it's funny because Carl, I remember I was reading through it was KJ No article in the Chow Collective about U.S. is on the warpath of China. The word brainwash, I didn't realize this because that's my own internal brainwashing because I went to a U.S. public, private, or charter school in the university system of the United States. It's a stormtrooper training facility. But in this article, it points out that the word for brainwashed is a Chinese word that the Chinese are referring to the Americans. Who are like buying this snake oil, right? Like just being impoverished, like taking all of this fake stuff, just listening to whatever the loudest, whitest man was saying. And like, that's not how we don't do that. We listen. And then like Luna says, that sounds fishy. I will investigate before I go. And then, I don't know, retweet the BBC, Reuters, AP article. Like as William Casey said, we'll know when the CIA's disinformation campaign is complete, when everything the American public and the entire West believes is false. And it's like, you guys are doing a really good job. Stop opening your mouth. Anyway.
And
look at the map right now. This is some.
This is from John Pilger's documentary, The Coming War on China.
Yeah.
And
So look at that. Like all the military bases out there, you say, and none of it is in Vietnam. Wow, awesome. We're so
good job.
There's a reason.
None of it is in Vietnam.
There's a reason there's no more U.S. militaries in Vietnam. I mean, there's a whole war fought about that. And
exactly.
The reason that, just to go back to what Silver Spook said about brainwashing, how that term brainwashing entered into English language is because during the Korean War, there's a group of American POWs who chose to stay in China rather than go back to United States. And then US freaked out because they thought, how could that possibly happen? How could they choose China? So they convinced themselves that China developed this secret psychological weapon to brainwashing the US POWs. And they even made a Hollywood movie called The Manchurian Candidate. And this is about how China brainwashed this US POW to go back to US, to infiltrate US, and to bring down the system. But I'm all for bringing down the US system. But I wish.
Please China go brainwash the USA. Please China go brainwash all the fuck out of USA. I'm so done of this.
Yeah, I wish that was true.
Yes, I wish. Like all the things that the conservatives saying that like would be awesome if true. I mean, wait a minute. We have a great we have a donation from West Bank Robbery Podcast. Thank you so much. The message is really off topic, but it is an awesome message. It says the message is free Palestine and fuck the police. Yes.
Hey, I'm down with that.
Yep, exactly.
I'm down. The graphic that was brought up earlier in terms of U.S. military bases from John Pilger's documentary, I think it's important because everything that Akemi was talking about, Silver Spook, everyone here has been talking about this U.S. military presence. And I think it's important because Carl brought up, empire and racism go hand in hand. And one of the functions of the relationship between empire and racism is to erase the actual consequences of what that militarization of the Asia Pacific really means for the people who live there. So in Okinawa, in Guam, in the Marshall Islands, right, you have devastating consequences from that militarization, whether it's, Vietnam experienced Agent Orange, but all across the Asia Pacific, there were Agent Orange canisters buried within the ground in a lot of these island nations. And then you have the fact that the United States has actually shifted, that graphic, that's actually 50% of the entire U.S. military apparatus, $1 trillion apparatus, 400 military bases, almost 400,000 personnel. A lot of those personnel are stationed on these small islands, terrorizing the indigenous people. Okinawa being a huge example of that, where the environmental conditions are becoming almost unlivable. Land has been stripped in enormous degrees.
Yeah.
And then you have the fact that you have 60% of the Navy, 55% of the entire US military just stationed in the Asia Pacific as an occupation force. And while we all talk, and it's very important to talk about how that is all in this grand strategy to contain China, but the environmental and the human consequences for the people of the entire region are so stark. And we brought up Japan and Okinawa. Japan right now, let's not even talk about Fukushima, right? They're planning on just dumping all that radioactive waste into the water. But in the Marshall Islands, there's a tin hut that's holding all this nuclear waste that the United States, they bombed the living shit out of the Marshall Islands, and that is coming undone. And that nuclear waste also threatens to leak into the sea and contaminate both the people and the planet. So there's so many consequences to this broad new Cold War that the US is waging on China, trying to bully Vietnam into allying with it, trying to bully all nations to ally with the United States. But it really comes at the expense of all of humanity. And so our hope from this conversation that I would really hope for in the future is that we continue to cooperate, especially in this media space, to get out this message that there are consequences to this. And it doesn't help anyone in the Western world, the United States either, because Carl brought up how much money was spent on, the war in Afghanistan, for example, $2 trillion. That's $300 million per day since the war started. And more than 50% of people in the United States, of all races and classes, they have less than $400 in the bank, which means you are not able to pay for any kind of emergency that happens to you in this very decadent and hyperinflated imperialist society. So it's so important to connect those two things together, because there are consequences for everyone. And I hope that this cooperation continues.
Yeah,
and
just
also,
go ahead.
and also the people in Asia and people in most of the world, they want to. It's not that they reject United States altogether. They want to do business with United States. They welcome U.S. with investment opportunities. That they don't want the U.S. military presence. They don't want. It's not very hard. Not very hard.
We
to,
want
like,
your
not
money. We
understand.
don't want your bombs.
Yeah, exactly.
Money, not bomb.
People. But right now, because U.S. just totally gave up even trying to compete economically with, say, China. So instead, the U.S. pivot to Asia project was entirely in the military sphere. And that's what the Asian nations don't want. They want the U.S. dollars. They don't want your military. They don't want your warplanes and warships flying around. That's not making people more secure. That's you're escalating the risk of war, making everybody on edge. And the thing is, we were talking about all this insane amount of money we spend in Afghanistan. It wasn't even spent on Afghanistan. All that money went into the pockets of U.S. weapon contractors, and we call it nation building. What did we build in Afghanistan, right? And the people make unite. There's progressive liberals who still say U.S. is a benign superpower. What's benign about that? What's benign about destroying millions of people abroad? And on top of that, every time this fiasco like Afghanistan happened, every time like Vietnam War happened, it's always presented in U.S. media. It's like, oh, we made a mistake. And it's like, oops, I did it again. It's always U.S. was presented as this bumbling empire that's accidentally got itself into a war. It's like, no, this is a pattern here. This is the same pattern for the last 50, 60 years. You didn't just whoops, you did it again. You intentionally go in there because there's money to be made for all your arms merchant sponsors, for all your corrupt congressmen, right? And this is it's amazing that not more people sees this. It's like this is the reason we don't have high-speed rail networks in United States. This is the reason we don't have universal healthcare, because we'd rather spend all that money, put all that money into the pocket of Lockheed Martin and Boeing and turn them into bombs and kill millions of people in the global south. And because we don't see them as human beings.
Exactly.
And I just don't.
And then
No, go,
I was
Luna,
just
go,
saying
Luna.
like, I think that we just got rated. Like it's awesome. About 310 people are watching right now. Hi everybody, welcome to this amazing panel. Just for like if you are just joining this panel, I'm just saying real quick that this is a panel for people of color from all over the world, victims of imperialism and capitalism, and we are dunking on the United States of America.
I wanted to just piggyback, Carl. Carl's been, of course, Carl spent many years in China. I only was able to go for 2 weeks, but I took 2 high-speed rail lines. And so I became very interested in high-speed rail because if you live and grow up in the United States, you understand just how decrepit and crumbling the infrastructure really is. Bernie Sanders was not lying about that. He might have been lying about how hard he will fight for certain things, but he was not lying about how decrepit the infrastructure here is. I mean, we just went through here in the United States, and this affected Asian communities here, especially in New York City and New Jersey, where there were immense floods from Hurricane Ida. We had more than 50 people in the New York City area die because of what was a torrential downpour, an extreme amount of rain. And the train system flooded out. There were videos going viral on Twitter of a place where I used to sublet on 7th Ave and 28th Street, right in the heart of the epicenter of Wall Street in Manhattan. The whole it looked like the water version of the scene from The Shining, if anyone gets that reference, where you're watching the blood come down the hallway. It was just an immense amount of water just flooding the stations. In China, and this is a very interesting thing because the United States spends all of this money on war, but actually China's high-speed rail network is I think it's over 35,000 kilometers. Immense, huge. It costs about 17 million per kilometer. So it's not that expensive. It actually could be done at a much cheaper rate than what the United at 4, 5, 6, 10 times less the rate that the United States spends on the military could be spent building a comparable high-speed rail. And in the United States is a much smaller country in population. So in effect, this is why we can't have nice things in the United States, is because the empire and its greedy, profiteering capitalist class has determined that at this stage of the system, the only thing that people can expect is more austerity, more privatization, more corporate theft, and more wars, and then all of the repression and militarization that's required to maintain all of that. And meanwhile, the United States pearl clutches over China and over Vietnam and all these in countries that are trying to develop infrastructure on their own, and calls them the bad guys. I wrote a whole report about how these big tech corporations and these Wall Street
guys here,
military contractors funding a think tank called the Innovation, the ITIF, the Institute for I forget what's Innovation Foundation, Information Technology Innovation Foundation. It's just this big tech military contractor, financial Wall Street
Tesla
think tank.
Cars.
Exactly.
Tesla cars is a future of the humanity.
And it was like 100,000. It was like 100,000 words or something like that of just talking about how bad it is that China basically ensures that the Chinese market is highly regulated and doesn't allow foreign private corporations to get majority shares in any kind of venture, especially high-speed rail ventures. And that's the big problem. It doesn't say China doesn't work with foreign corporations, with US and Western corporations. It doesn't say that they're actually stealing anything. Their whole definition of stealing is China, these Chinese firms, many of them state-owned, ask just how to do certain things. They want to know how these things are built so they can build it themselves. They don't want the United States and the West to be nation building, quote unquote. But that is what this is really all about. The United States is so opposed to examples of building the infrastructure that the United States really needs right now, because the United States can't even handle a rainstorm, and those things are coming at a much more intense rate because the United States just so happens to be the world leader in pollution, i.e. the military. The US military is the world leader in pollution. It is polluting the world at the highest rate. So anyway,
China builds a high-speed rail originally using foreign technology because China mandated all the different foreign multinationals like Siemens, both German, French, Canadian, and Japanese firms to do technology transfer. That's part of the deal. If they want the contract in China, if they want to sell their rolling stock, if they want to sell their high-speed railway train cars in China, they must do technology transfer. And that's actually what the Western media complains about, is because China is actually asserting its own sovereignty. It's like, we welcome you to do business here, but you have to follow our rules. They don't like that. They don't like any rules on any multinationals. They don't want rules on capitalism at all, right? They want the unfettered free market capitalism, which only benefits the established Western multinational companies. That's what they want. And when the countries in the global South nations do a pushback, they're like, oh, no, that's bad. That's bad. You're going against the tenet
But at what cost? But at what cost?
At what cost? Bloomberg, New York Times.
At what cost?
Oh my goodness. I just wanted to tie a bunch of this together, like from Vietnam. So there's something that, again, it kind of unites all of us together, but in a kind of personal way. And here in Hawaii, because some people will say, well, what do we do about this? And there's a lot of people now, like universities. Like I'm going to be guest lecturing at a culture studies and game studies course in British Columbia with another Asian Pacific Islander, Professor Chris Patterson, on Open World Empire. It's a book that he wrote about how the open world, how online gaming and this predominance of it is a new tool of empire in the way that the Hollywood and Ayn Rand wrote the Motion Picture Association. The number one anti-communist of the 20th century wrote the entire script guide for the Hollywood that's been editing all the scripts and making sure Red Dawn is about. I remember it was supposed to be Chinese invading the west coast of the United States with Chinese tanks, Chinese soldiers, Chinese flags. And they had to, oh no, the US won't make enough money because China has a huge consumer base. Let's Photoshop North Korea into all of their insignias. And anyway, so this kind of like this empire, it's in the gaming space, it's in the culture space. Interestingly, China is like now like capable of regulating what the Bloomberg one, it's like Bloomberg and the Atlantic Council, these washed up, emerald diapered babies like Elon, these Captain Apartheids are like writing these terrible articles, narco trafficking and failing at wars in Afghanistan. And they write these garbage articles like, oh no, what will we do? The big tech is destroying the world. AI will ruin the planet. The children are all being destroyed by online gaming and triple capitalist, casino video games and all loot boxes. And the Chinese are like, well, we're going to regulate this. And we're going to, I was watching like CGTN. There's like on the Chinese television, the so-called brainwashed Chinese, they're like, there's a young Chinese person like from like Shanghai. Like, I don't actually agree with a lot of this law. I think that this is a problem. I think this is a problem. They're like criticizing it on the national television, but you will never see the actual democracy. You can't say ascientific, nonsensical, or fascist things like, hey, let's go to war with a country or like some very racist thing in Vietnam or China. You can't say like COVID-19 is a 5G American bioterror weapon to destroy China. You can't say that. You can in America though. And as long as you don't say something that jeopardizes public health, same thing in Hawaii. When we control it, it's like everybody must follow the rules that collectively take care of all of us. And you are allowed discussion, like in good faith under dialectical materialism, which we could argue that the indigenous people of Turtle Island and in China kind of basically invented, good faith discussion that benefits all of us. And there's freedom of speech, and we can talk about this. And but if you're beyond the pale, or if you're just like dropping your propaganda, and the Great Firewall of China, one of the smartest thing they ever did, because then it stopped everybody from being complete. 50% of America think that horse dewormers and sheep tranquilizers is going to cure COVID-19. That or Jesus, one of those two is going to cure COVID-19. And then you have horrible 640,000 plus deaths. And but to tie us all together, fun fact people don't know, Hawaii is in fact, he's talking about the bombing. We have a $12 billion, we have a rail that was supposed to cost like less than $10 billion. It's like 200% over budget. It's like 10 miles long. 20 years over time. You can't. China can build 50,000 kilometers of rail. It can rebuild the like a multi-thousand-year-old Silk Road, and huge portions of it. And it was 10,000 kilometers of high-speed, highest quality rail in the time it takes America to fail to build 10 miles in the richest, ultra capitalist core of Honolulu. Is really even richer than Manhattan when you look at how many billionaires. We got Larry Ellison here. We got the Mark Zuckerberg owns 1,200 acres here, forcing Native Hawaiians off of our fishing grounds and our hunting grounds. We've got Lanai owns the entire thing. He's playing basketball with Shaq on his 200-foot yacht, having underpaid Micronesian and Filipino human traffic people servicing his, it was Dole that was Lanai was his entire island of his pineapple republic in the United Fruit Company, bloody colonial sense. And in 2010, this continues. This is just the same story. And anyways, and so in Hawaii, we still can't get that rail built. In fact, in the military, where that comes into it is the military industrial complex. Like, this is the head of the Indo-Pacific Command. This is like the other half of the Death Star. The other half is in DC, and half of it's here. And the most important half is here because of the war on China, this is the linchpin of the full spectrum dominant strategy. And so, if you care about land back, that's another thing. If you care about land back, people land acknowledgements for indigenous Anishinaabe in Michigan. You go to the University of British Columbia and say, "Oh, I feel so terrible for the Haida people." I'm teaching this anthropology 206 class from Haida people's ground, white settler, rich. Universities are basically like they're hedge funds with fake educational characteristics that are gentrifying entire cities. What is a university in the United States, right? What are you actually doing? Gianna Napolitano wrecking universities are on Mauna Kea, like literally forcing against the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, multi-billion-dollar corporate projects on top of bombing at Pohakaloa. They're bombing 30 miles from where I'm streaming, by the way. Not right now, but at the night, you can hear it. They're practicing for hybrid war in the South China Sea. Hopefully it doesn't disrupt the entire planet and start nuclear holocaust. But here in Hawaii, they are actually bombing 30 miles from where, and they have in this history. When we were on Mauna Kea, right? We were stopping a illegal multi-billion-dollar project backed by Gordon Moore, Silicon Valley, Canadian universities, California, Gianna Napolitano, the entire system, University of Hawaii. We were up on that mountain. They were bombing. They brought B-52s up from Guam, another U.S. lily pad that's horribly crushed like Okinawa. They bombed the B-52A Stratofortress. Some of the ones that were used in Vietnam, they practiced bombing for the single greatest day of bombing in Afghanistan. Guess where it was? It was on top of Uyghurs' heads in eastern Afghanistan. They celebrated it. There's a general, Daniel Dunbar has a video clip of it, celebrating how many Uyghurs we killed in Afghanistan. And then the next year, they're like, delist ETIM and, we got to care so much about the human rights of these people that we eviscerated into tiny little pieces for the military-industrial complex. So that ties Afghanistan, that's an Asian country, by the way. That ties Hawaii. Also, the neutrality that Vietnam has. Hawaii was the third, it was one of the core neutral countries in the 1800s. After Switzerland was the first in the family of nations, and which I really hope that you continue to stay that course. And anyway, so if you want to support the indigenous peoples, like you're one of these left liberal, you want to be like for real, you can't do land back for the Native Hawaiians unless you stand against imperialism, because that's what's on our 180 million gallons of fossil fuel that I've been to Marshall Islands, by the way. I've seen Kwajalein, where the Vandenberg practices shooting nuclear missiles into Korea, Vietnam, what they want to do to China. They practice shooting ICBMs into Kwajalein, and I've been there. I did some work in Majuro. 56 nuclear weapons detonated. They poisoned the entire people. All the horrible birth defects you can imagine in Marshall Islands. If you want to help those people, you want land back for the Marshallese, you want land back for the Palauans, you want land back, you want to support indigenous people of Hawaii, you must be anti-military industrial complex. You must be anti-imperialist, as Evo Morales from South America also said, which is where the sweet potato, which is in Hawaii, which is an indigenous technology that's all over the planet. And if you have one in Europe, that's indigenous technology. So stop saying that we're not advanced in biotech as well. If you're not anti-imperialist, you are not revolutionary. And if you're not anti-imperialist, you are not supporting your indigenous peoples. And you are a genocide. Actually, you are supporting genocide. So stop committing genocide against me. You're genocide defender. Those people,
genocide defenders. I'm so tired of those people. And the thing is, like, it is so disgusting to see a bunch of people like define themselves as leftists, white especially. And when we like talk about like when they hear people like us talking about like black nationalism or land back, they don't ask. They never ask what we meant when we said those words. They immediately project their poor understanding of the white nationalism and all of their genocidal arguments, something like that, and then they projected that onto us. And like
they think it's going to be white genocide. They think we will do to them what their ancestor did to us.
Yeah,
that's
pure projection. Pure projection. It's insulting to us, like, because all we want is equality. All we want is to live in peace and equal, and that's it.
That's another thing. Like, the world doesn't increasingly no longer need the U.S. You know, the Asia Pacific gets on fine without U.S. There's already
Exactly.
There's more economic interdependency, economic trade networks between East Asia and the countries and nations in East Asia than with United States. You know, like, U.S. can butt out. You know, like, if U.S. want to come into East Asia, to Asia Pacific, to do business, to do investment, that's welcome. If you want to do, you know, you can keep your worship, you know, shove it back to Washington D.C., whatever you want to put it. Just like, don't pollute. U.S. military is the number one polluter in the world, by the way, as an organization.
They criticize global South country for like having pollution. It's like, we like teeny tiny compare. I'm not excusing for the pollution in Vietnam, but like, it's teeny tiny, like a fingernail compare to the pollution in the USA. And the funny thing is that it's so much contradiction that like lots of people cannot see. The USA spent like trillions of dollars on the weapons to bomb the shit out of the whole world. But you guys cannot afford health care.
It's true.
I can bomb healthcare into Afghanistan, I'm sure. A few more bombs any second now.
It's the fact that you know, even though those people who criticize, say, pollution in countries like China and Vietnam, they forget United States and Western countries, they offshore their pollutions to the global South countries when the offshores are other manufacturing as well, because the goods that's been made in Vietnam, made in China, a lot of it's being exported to the Western market. So what you're doing is actually you're offsourcing all the pollution that before was in US to the global South nations, and now you're blaming the global South nations for polluting the world. Very convenient. Think about that.
Yeah, right.
And also sanctioning China. The Biden administration sanctioned a solar production, you know, a renewable energy corporation in Xinjiang, right? So China and other countries are trying to develop renewable energy and actually do quite well. And as Carl said, China and the rest of the Asia Pacific really doesn't need the United States. And
we don't.
This is a huge reason why, is because whenever any country, with China, Vietnam, with DPRK, wherever whichever country gets in the way of the US's ambitions, ultimately the United States punishes them and has no interest in the development of those countries, the social, economic, or political development of those countries in the interest of the people there. And so I do need to go now. It's getting very late here out in the Eastern time zone. But I do want to just say, first of all, thank everyone. I appreciate being here with all of you, and thank you so much for the invitation. But I do want to say that one of the real hopes here, I think, the United States' policy of endless war, this like rapacious policy of endless war, it's really an act of desperation, because what is happening with China, to a lesser degree Russia, and non-aligned countries like Vietnam, like the DPR, what's happening around the world is that there is a shift in the pole of political and economic power. So the U.S. is on the decline, and so is the entire West. I mean, we talked about high-speed rail. All of those high-speed rail corporations in Germany and France, they're all floundering, right? They're all floundering. They're not getting government investment anymore. The United States doesn't even have one, doesn't have a singular firm that can produce high-speed rail on its own. And so this, I think, speaks to the hope that humanity has right now, in the sense that the entire planet right? That this includes the African continent, it includes South America, it includes the Caribbean, it includes much of the eastern part of the world, and and much of the Western Hemisphere as well. There is now an understanding, more so I think now than ever, that the resources are all there, right? Actually, a lot of resources on the African continent, for example, are not even tapped yet because those countries have been kept in such a complete state of underdevelopment by the West, and now led by the United States' campaign of militarization, that all of the resources aren't even touched in some respects. And those that are being shipped out. But now there is an understanding that the rich resources that lie underneath the indigenous people and the people who inhabit the countries targeted by US and Western imperialism, those resources can be used to better humanity, to save the planet, to improve the economic livelihoods of everybody. That includes people in the Western world, and the United States and its client states, its puppets, wherever they are, Europe and the rest of the world, they are desperately trying to maintain a stranglehold and prevent that movement. And I think that will ultimately fail, and it will be up to us here who reside in the belly of the beast to then demand that the US and its puppet states don't do the unthinkable, because that is where this is headed. This is headed. The US cannot arrest its decline, and so we have to be ready to respond to the unthinkable, and that means responding to the war crimes that are happening right here, right now.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks so much to Danny for coming on. It was really good to meet you, and totally understand if it's a little bit late in New York or in that coast.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Peace, comrades.
Night.
I really enjoyed being with you all, and I'll definitely catch the rest of the conversation when I'm able. All right, take care.
Yeah.
Catch ya.
Bye. Good night.
Look forward.
Hi, Danny.
All right.
All right. So back to the point where now the whole world, we don't need the USA. Like if you think about it seriously, what does the USA produce that the world cannot produce? You don't even have any big factories in the USA. We don't need you except your dollars, except your consumerism, and
If
it's
I
just
can,
like the product of capitalism. Yes.
I was going to say, if I can give a totally practical example here, part of game development is also the side of making a merch shop, right? Which I'm sure you do with YouTube as well, and it's this kind of thing where it is painfully obvious when you go to say madeinchina.com, which is a supplier site for Chinese manufacturers, right? That you can see how much capitalism has sort of inflated the value of things. For example, I'm wearing this T-shirt here, right? And to put it into perspective, it's about as good as what I would get from my Kmart, or we have Kmart in Australia, but I'm pretty sure that's kind of destroyed in the US at the moment. But
Yes, it is.
yeah, no one knows about Kmart anymore, but Australia has it, right? It's about as good as that. And what you can see straight away is the through line of how these capitalist nation states take a product from China, because they all get it from these Chinese certified suppliers, right? And then what they do is they mark up the value, and it's the kind of thing where you can see really obviously the exploitation of the nation at home on how much the markup happens, because it's this kind of thing, I think, where you can see really transparently what the what's going on in that equation.
To add to what you said, the Apple phone, 5% of the price of the Apple phone gets distributed among the Chinese producers, the workers, etc. The other 95% goes to the U.S. companies, and ultimately the bulk of it go to the Apple, right?
Well, see,
so that's how it works.
Here's the thing this blew my mind, right? Is when you go and look for T-shirts, you'll obviously have ones that are V-neck or circle cut or whatever, right? There is a specific type of T-shirt called election T-shirts, right? And they're the ones where it'll say Biden or something like that, right? those shirts cost 50 cents to produce. Okay. So when they do those donation campaigns, they are like, most of the time for those donations, or, to get the shirt, it's like $30 or something like that, or $50, right?
Yeah.
So they're like add-on to this thing that costs 50 cents to produce is insane, right? And it shows this, like absolute, I think, like like what Luna was saying, like you don't need to buy from the US anymore, because like even if you do, say for example, like in Australia, I can go to Vistaprint, right, to get things made. They will outsource that to China immediately, right? Because that is the only way they can stay competitive, is to outsource a product I buy in Australia to China, where they ship it here and probably do some kind of, maybe it's 90% done and they do the last 10% so they can say it was made in Australia or something, right? And it's this kind of thing where you go like, well, actually, this system that everyone says never fails, right? Which, of course, it fails every few months. When you see like the difference in the quality and all this stuff, like with your own hands and stuff, it's pretty obvious that like that system works much more efficiently, And I think it's just one of these things where, honestly, it's such a really interesting thing to look at, especially like someone like me who lives in a Western nation state, and like what we were talking about with this Cold War at the moment is, a lot of times you hear this assumption that it's, oh yeah, you're getting it there, but it's made in a sweatshop. Well, you can actually go to these factory floors and see the machinery they use, and the reality is they have a giant machine that they just put the fabric through, okay, and it just automatically does it. The idea that it's a sweatshop is a myth from, the last 40 years.
US still has still has a lot of capital and a lot of technology, but right now US is not willing to share its technology, and it's doing less capital investment abroad. So so what is the reason for US again? It's like I said before, a lot of Asian nations, a lot of the global South nations, they welcome to do business with US. They welcome the US dollars. They welcome investment. They would very much love it if US would share U.S. technology with them, but that's not happening. That's not what U.S. is doing right now. What U.S. is doing is sticking worship up their butt. So that's not something people want.
But the U.S. has like Hollywood. They have a Disney. We all need it, right?
Oh yeah, I definitely need another Star Wars thing that talks about nothing. Yeah.
But even a lot of that U.S. so-called soft power, Disney, Hollywood, all that is built on the back of the U.S. empire. That's how Coca-Cola and McDonald's get exported all over the world. Is that soft power comes from the hard power of U.S. empire, right? I mean, why people wanted to purchase those things, because they're cool, this let them to participate. This is this kind of U.S. originated global consumerism. But that's just just destroy it all, man. Just tear it all down,
please. We have about 13. Oh yeah, just I would say this real quick. We have about 13 minutes left until the show ends. So like, if you in the chat you have any questions, just feel free to ask us, and we try to answer them all. Okay. To you.
Yeah, something that Professor Chris Patterson mentioned, I think, at last week's panel on Silver Spook's channel, was that the military and tourism are like deeply intertwined, and like it wasn't until he mentioned that it just clicked for me, and I just wanted to bring that up.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like that's like Hawaii. We're basically we're like, it's like a Disneyland theme park, but with an actual indigenous culture under it. That just the whole thing is, a lot of people get upset, when they hear about a cultural appropriation, but all of Waikiki, the so-called Polynesian Cultural Center, all of that fake plastic lei, the Jason Momoa, the analog that you're like, you can learn how to surf from, and this all of that stuff, like literally Dole's pineapple adverts. I have a link, I have a thread somewhere that shows them. It's just like the pictures in that Advanced Hawaii thread where we had like, we're all like, in like full, like not just Western style suits, but we also have hula. We have cultural, hula garments that we wear, but which is a very different type of hula. It's not the kind you're gonna find in Waikiki. That's all like Vegas strip show fictional versions of ourselves, and we're just most of our economy, it's 70 like huge, multi tens of billions, it's a capitalist foreign owned. Like you want to give Donald Trump money, stay at the Ritz-Carlton. You want to give Goldman Sachs money, giant East Coast mega bank, neo-colonial firm, go stay at the Turtle Bay Resort. You want to give, you want to elect the Republicans a little bit. You want the classic Mitt Romney flavor, stay in any of the Marriott hotels. They're huge conglomerate. They own everything. And then, and then there's some Japanese big capital. They have all the tacky, $120 billion mansions with tacky, like bird of paradise and fake, tiki godheads that are all insults to Hawaiian culture, and then they come here, they buy it up, they store, $50 billion. Oprah has an entire highway in Maui. She had to let people go through her private highway so they didn't get incinerated in the climate change fires caused by the U.S. military industrial complex and the next 70 companies, 100 companies that are producing the next 70% of emissions. The U.S. is producing all these emissions and these huge capitalist corporations, and then we're getting incinerated. And also, Hawaiians can't, just this because of the dry spell, and people are coming in bringing COVID-19, which please don't come to Hawaii right now. There's way too many cases, and they're making morgues for us. And on top of that, they said, because we're having a water shortage, Hawaiians, you can't have your 10-person graduation party, your luau, but you can have 100-person unmasked, unvaxxed, Disney Aulani resort, fake, Lilo and Stitch party, for the white rich tourists. And then we also can't use water to grow our own indigenous food, but you can have a huge golf course owned by Larry Ellison, owned by Bill Gates, and they can water that all they want. They're building 3 artificial surfing park on Maui. It's disgusting. 3 separate artificial lakes to take all the water that remains.
They're building artificial surfing parks in Hawaii.
Yeah, what do you need that for? You got the whole beach.
I was going to say, I remember Jan, we had about a year ago, and we were talking about the fact that even the main beach there in Hawaii is using stolen sand from Newcastle, like in Australia.
Oh,
yeah. It's that
the
sand that they've taken there to make it give white tourists their impression of Hawaii, where they're using sand from stolen land down in Newcastle. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's all it's all a construction that is deeply rooted in that racism, of this is what you guys look like. You're not allowed to have your own express your own identity and stuff.
Go ahead.
I think Lenin said, right, the imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, and that's what they do. They break you down. They take away all the resources from indigenous people, and then they break down your culture and they commodify it, and they make you take your culture and your identity and turn that into a commodity and sell it as kitsch and gadgets.
Disgusting.
I mean, it is. It is.
Yeah, like one of the things, we always, and speak about the same thing in the airports there as well. But whenever you go to an airport in Aotearoa, there's just all these tourist shops, and either they've got these really dodgy looking korowai that are basically just a piece of synthetic sheep rug that someone stitched together and said that's a Maori traditional garb or whatever, or you see greenstone for sale, and it's this really interesting thing where greenstone is it's a tonga from Vaitahu, and it's the kind of thing where part of that iwi's process of stopping the theft, because a lot of times it's the kind of thing where people will enter those rivers and steal the greenstone and then go carve it themselves to make it look like a Māori artifact kind of thing. And so what they've started to do is they made this social enterprise where you can track the greenstone and you can see who the carver was and where this stone went through. And it's this really interesting thing, because now you can actually see in those airports the stuff that is either, stolen and used inappropriately, or you can see the stuff that has been, imported from China or Australia. And it's not even jade, it's a rock that looks similar, and someone has done it to exploit the wealth there. And I think it's a very interesting way that iwi responded, because it was the kind of thing where basically you get given a little code and you can track through to see the legitimacy of the thing. And you can even see if the carver who did it was a Ngāi Tahu carver, you know what I mean? Someone who was actually given permission to do it. So I think it's a really interesting way that's they've responded to that. But it's so prevalent, I think, that it's such a hard thing to sort of combat. Yeah.
Just one thing, I want to jump in just really quick to tie this into China, because this is such an important point, which is going back to like human rights and respecting culture, and it really ties it all together. I'm trying to do it really quick, but by the way, I just watched the Rainbow Warriors of the Rainbow, that based on your recommendation, Carl. It was very good. We're related to those people, the Austronesian peoples of Taiwan, and thinking of the indigenous peoples, you know, and in China, the 56 ethnic regions, and you know, really, I've been watching a lot of like, there's a variety of channels, like New Moves is one. There's a few that are like visiting China. And I was like, I'm a social worker. Like, that's what I was doing before. You know, I was trying to alleviate poverty alleviation, right? That's the main mission of the, you know, the Communist Party of China, of the people generally, right? Is feeding people historically, and especially in the last 100 years. Congratulations, by the way. At alleviating 1.4 billion people's absolute poverty. And you know, I tried to help Micronesian, Filipino, you know, Hawaiian, Chinese, poor Chinese in the downtown ghettos of Honolulu, where we have the highest rates of, you know, one of the most unaffordable places in the world. People living 22 a house, just dying of 39 of food deserts, and just horrible conditions. Like, and anyway, so and then I worked in there for a decade. And I try to alleviate poverty. I'm like trying to like teach kids how to, like, you know, just shop, health, getting them into jobs just at a Starbucks, like occupational knowledge. It's really just like working with individuals and their families to try to like, what do you need? What do you need? And I was watching like the stories of like the People's Liberation Army, right, going all over China, the Uyghur, the Han, the Hui, the mountainous regions. And like, I did my best, you know, to at least keep kids out of the prison industrial complex, or signing up for the U.S. military to go bomb some more people, like we're talking about for imperialism. But like, I hope I saved some kids. But I it's worse today where I'm from in Honolulu, you know. And I looked at China, I'm like, these places that had no plumbing, no water, nothing. They're just like no literacy, like just completely backwoods. And they go from that to like actual alleviation of poverty. And they're in the Urumqi, where the Uyghurs have the 150 million people going. You know, I mean, tourism might work, you know, and like I watched the Golden Week, hundreds of millions of people going across China, enjoying all their other cultures, Uyghur culture, Kazakh, etc., the Hui, and all these other cultures, their different foods. And I'm like, and this tourism is like benefiting those people. Like, they have houses, they have healthcare, you know, they're like doing better. They're doing better. And like my people in Hawaii, in the Chinese and Filipino diaspora in Hawaii, the indigenous people of Hawaii, we're doing worse. Like, my kids are, you know, we're all doing worse. And then over there, like their birth rate is accelerating. They have 2.5 times more mosques than before. They have like higher rates in colleges. Their life expectancy is soaring. And anyway, so mutual cooperation. I'm like, when is China going to build a Silk Road in downtown Honolulu? Help us build. So our roads are falling apart, and the water pipes are leaching copper and lead and frack water and U.S. military fossil fuel. So, but anyway, that's an important difference, which is that, like, I think that if we can focus on that, how we can work together to alleviate poverty. I noticed the Chinese, they said recently that our mission is to alleviate poverty of the people and fulfill the material needs of the 1.4 billion people of our country. But we realize now that we are where we are now, we have to work to also alleviate all of the people of the world, you know, like indigenous people, we would say, you know, like for Hawaiian, like Ohana, right? You know, like, and the Kanaka Maoli, we believe that we're all relatives. I'm going to talk to my relatives in the Sioux and the Anishinaabe and Turtle Island. We all call each other brother and cuz and auntie. And anyway, I'm kind of going off in a variety of directions. But I think that's like, you know, if there's something that, if I don't say anything else for the rest of the stream, I think like working together, cooperating, hui together, you know, as all of our peoples. And hopefully, if these younger races, these younger European misled peoples can like learn to cooperate and play nicely, I hope that we can all. But, you know, yeah.
That's a big question for us, I think. What if self-determination fails due to individuals having different desires? How does this community fulfill those different desires if it is counter to what others may desire? What do you think about this, panel? I think I will answer first. I mean, like Vietnam, we have our revolution, you know, communist revolution about 70 years ago. And the fact is that there are 54 ethnic minorities in Vietnam. So believe it or not, Vietnam is a very diversified kind of country with a lot of people with different desires and something like that. And the thing is, we as a revolutionary, I think as a revolutionaries, we have to find a common ground between us. And I think that the very first common ground between us is this: anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, anti-fascism, and anti-racism, and one equality to all races. Now that is a very common ground that I do believe that we all can share, and then we work from that common ground to gain people into our out into our fight. And then once we successfully have a revolution and dismantle the empire of the USA, then we will peacefully together work on the other difference that we might have a like disagreement with. But for now, the priority for us is capitalism, imperialism, and fascism. They are killing our people literally every single day, and we must unite to fight against that first.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, to build from the common ground. I mean, this is the hyper individualism that's been promoted by the West. That's really making more conducive for capitalism, right? When individuals are atomized, alienated, make us more susceptible to all the ads when they're trying to sell us product. That's supposed to bring the cure to our problem of alienation and atomization. And this talk about individuals have different desires. Of course, there's a tons of people in the global south. Not all of them are of the same hive mind, right? But as long as people, we find what's common and build from that. As for community, how to fulfill this different desire if it counters to what others may desire, that's we have. There are contradictions in every society, right? And those, as long as those contradictions are not brought open in a way that pits communities against other communities and being used as a divide and conquer tactic by the ruling elite, I think people can work out those contradictions among themselves. And I want to go back to something what Silver Spoon has said about I think the people who live in the imperial core or the occupied indigenous land, they also, should while reach out for alliances, but also should focus on building individualism. Socialism. Sorry, socialism in their own country, because. One of the things that you brought up, the reason why Vietnam and China are very successful in their COVID response is because they have a socialist government, right? Because it's not a government structure around making profit.
Exactly.
And that's why money and resources were able to devote for the common goals. And that is why as the West becoming increasingly more dysfunctional, they have to up the ante on the propaganda warfare to make sure that, to avert people's gaze toward the more successful models. And that's why in a recent tweet from the new article from New York Times Opinion, they said countries with fewer deaths than expected, often distinguished by blah, blah, blah. And they list countries like New Zealand, Taiwan, Norway, Iceland, Japan, Singapore, and Denmark. They didn't mention Vietnam. You can't mention Vietnam. You can't mention China. You can't mention any socialist countries, So only ones they could list is like either U.S. allies or U.S. client states, because they don't want people to seek the alternative model. They don't. They don't want the people to realize, maybe the model of liberalism and capitalism is failing, right? And that. So this is something we have to be more conscious of. But I think, we should all focus on our own individual communities or the country we reside in to bring forth the socialist future that we want. At the same time, the reason I say that is, I don't think it's realistic to expect China just come in and right? We want that, we would like that, but we have to rely on ourselves, on our own struggles, and once that part is done, it's then the makes even more cooperation possible. That's my piece.
Can I just say, I can probably tie it into this question as well, but I guess if you live in a neoliberal society, the idea of self-determination is basically voting for the guy who you think best represents you, right? There is no real agency of the individual in that case, right? I would definitely just kind of agree with Luna on that, because like I guess the thing that I think about when I saw that question is sort of like the, how would you put it, the sort of range you have on, like, for lack of a better word, BreadTube, where you have a lot of people who agree on certain things, but you know, certain people sort of fit in here, and then another might fit in there, and then there are some people who fit over here that don't really agree with any of what's being said there at all. And I would say, like, find the similarities, and then, you know, where the differences are, that is like a pretty good point to, I think, cut off, if that makes sense. Like if there's you know, like a group that is, or you know, a person in your sort of collective of individuals, I guess, is, and they've got more of a stance that goes against sort of your fundamental ontology or ideology, it's, I think, a good time to just sort of push them to the side and move on with, I think, where it's what's the word, like, connected up, like move with people who are, you know, sharing your interests, and that's not a bad thing. Like, obviously you can still talk to those people time to time, but I think it's much more beneficial to sort of move as a unit rather than try and, you know, move and then try to have to pull this person along who's dragging their legs on things, you know.
Thank you so much, Ivis, for your super chat. Self-determination must be subordinate to the end of building communism, not for its own sake. Otherwise, it's just liberal, herdist nationalism. Yeah, exactly. And that is why, like, you know, like when Vietnam, we won the Vietnam War, and then we have our own, like, we walk on our own socialist path. The thing is, a lot of people don't understand. A lot of, like, if we've been attacked by a bunch of reactionaries and the ultra left too, like Vietnam is now like traitor to communism and blah blah blah. But the thing is, first we gained our independence and freedom, but now we are trying to build internationalism. Now that is very important. And then, like, Ho Chi Minh and like Fidel Castro, we talk about that a lot. Like we will get rid of our flags. We will get rid of our nationality once the whole world is free from capitalism. The whole world is free from imperialism. Once we can gain true internationalism, we would be so happy to throw away our flags, to throw away our nationalities. But in this period of time, when we are still like being like, you know, like constantly like threatened by capitalism, by imperialism, we have to maintain our border to protect ourselves. Because like, if we lose ourselves, we will lose everything that we sacrifice for this. We will lose our revolution. And that is why a lot of people don't understand. I feel like there are some anarchists, like they are anti-borders and they anti-every countries like Vietnam for maintaining our like nationalism and our flag, be proud of our flag and our nationality. Like they don't understand that this is just the transitional period. This is just like a temporary period. And we will move to internationalism in the future once we can totally defeat imperialism.
If there's a successful anarchist model, I'm sure we are willing to learn.
Exactly. We I am a Marxist-Leninist, but I'm desperately want like anarchists and even like ultra left, like, please have a successful revolution somewhere in the world. Prove that you can have a successful revolution. You can have your own self-determination. Prove that we are wrong. Like, totally have our support, and we are so happy. And so please, like, stop the leftists infighting and focus on doing something real out there. That is my very strong desire. Like, yeah.
Because I think that the best thing around that is like, people talk about that idea of like building class consciousness. I think like one of the best things at the moment is getting people to like read, you know, like reading groups and stuff, right? Like to get people all on the same page about that, eh? Or not?
Oh no, we shouldn't read anything. only listen to Silk and Steel podcast is the only reading history you ever will need. No, but I will throw it to Akemi. I want to throw it to Akemi because you know, speaking of reading, I know that's one thing. Like when we're doing these streams, it's I do hope that, you know, like in the future, of course, we would like to do other ones, you know, if everybody is interested at some point and you have time. But I know Kemi and other folks had said, you know, just like, you know, it can be difficult individually isolated reading, you know, very difficult history about, you know, just the history of colonization and genocide and crushing of Okinawa or Hawaii for myself. I'm crying about all this. Just watching the show last night about the indigenous people in Taiwan. It's just they wiped out by the end of it. It's very hard to. It's hard to take, and so if you have groups like when we do these streams, I think it's important too, because then it's a place for people to at least feel like they're hearing this and it's reflected in the way people are reacting, and we're not just kind of like isolated individuals as neoliberal, what is it, homo economicus, just one consumer. We're like part of a collective project, even if I know Kemi is like far off in a different place, but especially now in COVID-19, it makes some in-person actions a little harder. So then I think it's important that it's another possible space that to help people to come together, kind of like integrate, feel like what they're learning is together. I mean, that's one thing about universities is you have to read for the seminar, then you kind of integrate your what you've read and you reiterate it through kind of group discussions of some sort. So anyways, but I do want to bring up that I've solved I brought the solution to world war and peace that will stop the war in China. I figured it out. You know what it is? It's actually Asian and Pacific cooperation in food, and it's called. Hey Holly, do you have the Okinawan sweet potato and haupia cake? I just found it's an Okinawan sweet potato. It's all gone. You ate it all. That's how good it is. See, we already solved world peace inside of this household. We got it from in Hawaii.
I need to try it.
You have to try it. It's the best thing. They all said, I can't eat too many carbs. I gotta watch the pre-diabetes.
What's it called? What's it called so people can Google it?
So Google, it's you can get it from Foodland in Hawaii. It might be a Hawaii only thing, but it's Okinawan sweet potato haupia, haupia cake. It's a fusion of Hawaii and Okinawa. The foods, coconut from Hawaii, haupia. It's a dessert from Hawaii, and Okinawan sweet potato in a cake.
Oh, that sounds so good. You're making me hungry right now.
Yeah, you're making me hungry right now. Seriously.
Yeah.
I'm Googling right now. Well, you know what? We are way over time, and I think that this is a great, a high note to end our stream together with the Okinawa sweet potato. Thank you so much for letting us know. Okay. Let's our guests have some final message to the audience. Let's start with Tali. What do you want to say to the audience?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for inviting me on. I think we'll have to get Yaron on next time. She's probably going to have better things to say than me. But yeah, I guess a call to action in the group is, or the chats, is if you haven't already, I think a good place to start if you want to start reading things is Black Shirts and Reds. But obviously jump off from there and go into other things as well. But if you want, you can buy and play my game, but that's not a necessity. I didn't really want to bring it up during this discussion. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us. What about you, Silver Spook? What do you want to say?
Again, mahalo nui loa, aloha. And, we have to work in a spirit of Yuri Maru, as Akemi said, to build the Shakang Shahui. I apologize if I'm saying that with bad pronunciation, but, I believe that that's a very important concept of moderate prosperity for all of the Hui, right? All of the people, in collaboration with our Asian, our Pacific Island, and all of our other relatives in various places in their decolonization process. And I really hope that, if you take away nothing else, that you don't have anything to fear across the Pacific or in the Pacific. And I hope that we can work together and you can learn. And there's really, we have gone through a period of the forever wars, 500 years of colonialism and 500 years of imperialism. And now is the 2020s and future is the forever peace, This is the reestablishment. That's why I wanted to talk about the new Silk Roads and the Austronesian people, my people, the Kanaka Maoli, and we were great wayfinders. But in order to find your place on the ocean, there are no roads, there are no straight lines. You look behind you and you find, Hokupa'a, you find, or Hokulea is the star of joy for Hawaii. you find your place directly behind you, and you find a reference point in front of you, and then that's how you navigate the waters. Like Mao Piailug taught Hanainoa Thompson, and I think that using all of this deep knowledge and the newer knowledge of socialism, which I would argue is indigeneity applied to barbaristic institutions, like Adam Smith's virus version, 3655, and then we need new and updated versions of that. But if we can be rooted in the past and also look to the future in mutual cooperation between nations, between peoples, we have amazing things to do together. So I hope that if people take that message of hope, going forward, and not message of conflict.
Yeah, thank you so much, Facebook. Akemi, what is your message to the audience?
Thinking about the question from earlier about like, well, I don't remember the exact question, but I remember that it brought to mind like all the different huis in Hawaii, like all the different communities and stuff. They'll have like their own individual things and everything, but they'll be able to come together. And sometimes I know about this because one of the books that I've read, Chimugukuru, was written by a hui Olaulima, whose like goal and things is to perpetuate and preserve Okinawan culture. And I think like hui, Silver Spook has Silver Spook hui, and it's kind of like we all bring like our own huis and come together to like share our experiences and our stories and find like where we connect. Like even if we don't know if we share like a common ground, like I'm talking generally like for people with like different groups of friends or colleagues or whatever, like just coming together, like bringing your hui and like your experiences, your stories, and sharing it with everyone, you find like different connections that you wouldn't be able to find it any other way, because our histories are so hidden from us and like purposefully so. And I think just learning and reconnecting with our cultures, and also learning other languages if you can, so you can communicate with other people, because sometimes English is not a very easy language to communicate things in. Yeah, I wanted to thank you all for having me and for all the knowledge I've learned from you all.
It's so nice to talk to you, Akemi. What about you, Karja? What do you have to say?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Luna, and thank you for all the beautiful, eloquent speech by my fellow panelists. And Silver Spook, I just want to say I love Hawaii. I want to go back one day. And I thank all the listeners, who tune in, and I hope you guys keep an open mind. You may not be standing exactly on the same political spectrum ideologically. That's okay. I just hope you keep an open mind, keep learning, and everybody, educate yourself, seek out like-minded people, get organized. And I'm very optimistic. Like Silver Spook, I'm very optimistic about the future. I think, if we all put our heads together, put our energy together, we can have a great future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yuimaru, the spirit of cooperation, and Chimugukuru, the spirit of compassion. Are two words that I always try to remember.
Yeah. It's so great to wow. Whose dog's that? Cute.
She's just saying goodbye as well.
Thank you so much. I am looking for somebody on Twitch to raid. Oh, no comment chick is it's live streaming right now. So Twitch people, please say hello to my comrade No Comment chick. And YouTube people, maybe if you still have time, jump on Twitch and check out our No Comment chick comrade. Good night, goodbye everybody, and hope that you would the storming is still happening right now in Vietnam. Hope that things gonna be fine. And
it'd be really funny if it just cut just right there because of the time.
Right.
Can I plug myself? I forgot to plug myself.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Please go check out Silk and Steel podcast, where I talk about everything China related. If you didn't get tired of my ranting on this show, go check it out. Silk and Steel podcast. You can Google it. Go to Patreon. I have a Patreon site. Thank you very much.
Okay. So nice. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye bye everybody, and see you next time.